Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend AC Churchill, and my pronouns are they, them. I am a contractor with Faith Action Network, doing work to help get information out to community members about clean energy upgrades, about the ways in which they can connect to resources that our state has for not only tax incentives and tax credits for clean energy upgrades for your faith communities, but also trying to help just create a common language, common understanding around why communities of faith, why sacred communities would even be interested in engaging in this work in the first place. So we're going to start off today, and I want to again welcome you all to Powering Missions. We've got a little bit of a slide deck here, not much of one, but this will be available to you all later as well. So welcome to Powering Missions, How Building Projects Can Amplify Ministry. So again, here's our agenda for the short agenda that we have today. We're going to have a bit of an opening meditation, a grounding moment, if you will, some introductions. We'll move on to this piece around strong foundations, and then get into the kind of the heart of where we'll be today, which is our community partners panel in this conversation around uh, um, sacred spaces. So first, I want you to just take just a minute. I don't know what your day has been like. Mine has been full already, but I want to take just a minute and kind of ground ourselves in this moment. You could have been many other places. You may be going places after this, and want to thank you for your presence here. So this is from a selection of meditations called nature meditations. I don't know if you might not be able to see this. Simple mindfulness practices inspired by the natural world. And this one goes like this. Everything on earth has a purpose. Bees pollinate our plants. Ants aerate our soil. Trees release oxygen. Each organism works independently for the good of the collective. As part of our whole, you too, myself included, have a unique and special contribution to make to our planet. Today, in this moment, take a moment to consider, what is the role that you play in your own ecosystem, whether it be your home, your work, your own spiritual community, maybe a school or organization, a club. Imagine how you are part of the whole that is around us. May these reflections, and I haven't given you much time, but may you take these reflections into the next piece of your day as we move into our conversation today. So just an introduction for the groups that you'll see participating in this conversation today. It's hosted by Faith Action Network, or FAN, which is a multi-faith movement of individuals and communities from across Washington State. Hopefully most of you know who the FAN is. If you don't, welcome. We're glad you're here. FAN, we are, like I said, a multi-faith movement. So we are Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, Quaker, Sikh, Unitarian, Universalist, and people of conscience. We celebrate our religious diversity and the unique wisdom that each faith tradition and spiritual practice brings to our work for justice. As an organization, we are also acknowledged that we, as we gather here, FAN gathers statewide, and we are in the lands of 29 federally recognized tribes, as well as those who are still seeking recognition. We honor the peoples, both present and past, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Next group that will be one of the other kind of community partners that we have here today is Design for Peace. Design for Peace is an initiative of the Southwest Washington Synod of the ELCA, whose vision is to nurture an ecology of peace by accompanying sacred communities through discernment and design. And you can see part of their culture shift of moving from a dominant culture that we all under that we have been embedded in, these waters that we swim in, and to a culture of shalom. And I'm excited for Joey, who will be telling us more about this in a little bit. So Joey is the design lead at Design for Peace. He's a Scottish transplant to the Pacific Northwest via Washington, D.C. and San Diego. His extensive experience in accompanying leaders of all kinds to work collaboratively for peace through his work as a faith-rooted community organizer. He studied theology at Oxford University, was trained as an organizer with Spanish-speaking Catholic communities in San Diego, and now works with a bishop's associate as a bishop's associate with the Southwestern Washington Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, ELCA. Joey, we are grateful that you will be here with us today. The last community partner that we're going to be highlighting today is Englewood Christian Church. Englewood Christian Church is an open and affirming, trauma-informed, social justice-oriented, progressive faith community committed to following Jesus. They embody their mission throughout Yakima and the surrounding Washington communities. And we are honored to have Reverend Dr. Christie Love with us today. Reverend Dr. Christie Love specializes in the research and study of the intersections of faith, religious trauma, and mental health. She's an ordained minister through the Disciples of Christ tradition, and published her first book, God of the Gaps, through Morgan James Publishing in April of 2021. And then locally, Christie also serves as the vice president of the NAMI Yakima board and the co-chair of the Yakima Association of Faith Communities and chair of the Yakima Immigrant Response Faith Work Group. We are so grateful you are here as well. So, with all of those pieces, want to start off this conversation maybe in a little bit of an unexpected place, which is not talking about hardware. I kind of lured you all in with this conversation about solar panels and building projects. You may be thinking about what tools you will need. And in truth, that is understandable, because when we think about building projects around churches or sacred communities, it's easy to begin with those hardware questions. Things like, do we have enough money? I wonder if any of you have experienced that within your own contexts. Or will we need permits? How long will the project take? Or one that maybe I'm the only one who has ever experienced a community setting like this that says, do we actually know somebody who could do this project for less? I mean, these are all important questions. And yet, I think this line that I have here want us to really lean into. Understanding the reasons why your sacred community exists and how it shows up in the world deepens your potential impact that you have on the lives of not only those who attend your congregation, but on the community who extends beyond the building, and increases the effectiveness of the work that you all can do together. What is your community's mission? The sacred community that you connect with or attend to, what is your mission? And why is it important to your community? Why is that mission important to the work that you do? How does your community live out that mission throughout the week? And the last piece is, what tools do you have to actually support that work, and what tools are missing? So I am going to leave these questions up here. I'm going to give us a couple minutes. I've got a timer, and so I'm going to give us 2 minutes to think about these questions. So any of you who are participating, how might you answer these questions?
I'd be happy to share something briefly. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
I mean, I'll share more about the sort of wider regional work, but with Design for Peace. But I live here in Tacoma, and about 2 blocks that way is Peace Lutheran Church in the Hilltop here in Tacoma, and I've been a member there the last 6 or 7 years or so, and it's walking distance from my house, and walk over there with my kids, and that's a core neighborhood congregation. That's a core part of the identity of the congregation. And the reality is that this is a gentrifying neighborhood that has been for 15 years more. And that this is a historically black neighborhood, and there's been lots of families displaced from this neighborhood over years through the forces of gentrification. And so one of that word, that sort of resisting gentrification or engaging in gentrification, has been really, really an important part of the mission of my local congregation. And I can share a bit more later if it's helpful about how that sort of led to using the spaces differently. But I think having the ability to name that as a really, really clear mission for the congregation, which is a multiracial congregation, a multi-generational congregation, and again, a congregation that's really committed to the 10 square blocks in every direction. I think that clarity of mission has been really, really critical to making decisions in the last 10 years or so, or decisions about money, decisions about mission, about priorities. So there's a really clear example that came to mind for me when you asked that question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes.
I can answer that question for Federal Way United Methodist Church, sort of.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, we've been off screen because we are actually watching it on our TV, and so I had to walk over to the computer to do this. But so the mission statement of our church is walking in faith, reaching out in love. And so the way we do that is always evolving, right? How do we do that? And so right now, our big thing is that we have a free store that we invite the community to come to once a month. And then we are toying with the idea of resiliency center. We don't know what that looks like and what that means quite yet. We're working on putting solar panels and battery storage on our building. That's been we got a grant to do that, and that's been a never ending saga, but it should come to fruition very, very soon. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think this is a good kind of segue. For those who just joined, we've been kind of reflecting on this kind of question as a grounding question, even before we get into the hardware, the tools questions of, what is your community's mission? And what is the mission, or why is that mission important to the life of your community? I mean, as someone who loves to tinker in woodworking, I have lots of different tools that I could use for lots of different projects. But knowing what I'm hoping to accomplish with that project actually gives me better clarity as to which tool I need to use and what we need to do and what I need to use in order to make that project come to fruition. Um, so, if your community is interested in doing food ministries, and if your community is interested, in assessing what the needs are around you, some of the other tools like solar panels or ground source heating may not be the first tools that you need to tap into. Maybe there are other tools that you could build upon the way. Maybe they are, but they're not the only ones. So we'll move towards that, the hardware soon. But as we kind of ground ourselves in that place of why we do what we do and what the purpose is, I'm going to actually turn it over to first Joey from Design for Peace to kind of answer some of these questions and reflect on, first of all, what does Design for Peace do, and what is your mission, and how do you live that out? So, Joey, do you need me to be able to give you access to a slide deck or
Nope.
screen?
Nope.
Okay.
It's quite all right. I'm here for a good conversation. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to spotlight you then so people see
Sure.
you.
Yeah, I can share. If it is okay just to share for a few minutes about that, and please, ask for clarity or dig in a little more if you'd like. But just I can share in an introductory way at the moment. Yeah, hi folks, nice to see you and a few of you I know. So it's really nice to be connected here, and thank you, Reverend AC, for the invitation to share a little bit here. And I, am an admirer and supporter of Fan's work, and you all have been a really important voice here in Washington for many years. A faith voice for justice, and I've been there for lobby days and other things along the way, and known some of you through that work. So thank you for the invitation. Yeah, again, my name is Joey. I use he/him pronouns, and I live here in Tacoma. And I work, as AC said at the beginning, I actually work for the ELCA Synod, which is like our regional body of this progressive Lutheran denomination here in southwestern Washington. So there's about 80 or 85 congregations that are members of our synod here from Federal Way, Tacoma area down to the Columbia River and across to the ocean. And about a few years ago, we started really hearing, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, hearing really clear conversations or messages from local congregations that said, yes, there's lots of issues we're concerned about, and yes, we're thinking about the future, and we want to do innovation work, and we want to be connected, and we want to be vital. But we're also really often burdened by questions about how we use our space. The congregations are rich in space and often not rich in other ways. And I'm originally from Scotland, which I don't know if you can tell. I got this slightly dodgy transatlantic accent, but it sort of reminds me sometimes of these, aristocratic families in the Highlands that are living in a big castle and can't put food on the table. These families that are owners of land, right? And in the West particularly, and I know around the world, that to own the land is to have power, right? To have control over land and space is to have power. It doesn't mean you have all the liquid money you need to use it, but to hold spaces, to own spaces is a source of power. And so as congregations, like this is, I recognize it, inherently privileged conversation that we are talking with often mainline progressive congregations, with interfaith congregations of all kinds, who are holders of space in the heart of community. And so we really heard that consistently, the dilemmas of that, okay, we've got, deferred maintenance for 10 years on the roof, what do we do? Or there's a crisis and we have to replace this boiler, it's going to cost $10, $15, $20,000. Do we do that, or do we rethink our entire use of the space and design a new plan for the next 10, 15, 20 years? And those dilemmas are very real and very practical. And to use your word, AC, they're hardware kind of questions, but they reflect always the software question. Okay, well, how do we make a decision about whether we spend our money on the roof or the boiler if we don't have clarity about who we are, where we're going, and what we're about, who we're accountable to, what our core values are? And so we see those as really, really deeply connected. So in short, Design for Peace is an initiative, again, rooted in the Synod, but we do work ecumenically and really eager to learn how to do more work interfaith as well. So we see, FAN as a great partner and a conversation partner in doing that work. But Design for Peace is an initiative that's really, our mission is about accompanying teams in congregations, in communities, to discern and design and experiment around the vision of peace. And those words are really intentional. And again, they're sort of connected to some of the conversation we've already had. That actually, I think our dominant culture is such a technical culture, it's such a technocratic culture, that we often start conversations like this and we say, great, I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to talk to the solar company, I'm going to get the lawyers on the phone, I'm going to get the engineers on the phone if we want to put solar panels or if we want to build affordable housing in our backyard. And that's very real. Those are very important, real conversations. But we have found over years of doing this work that the churches, the teams, the congregations that really make it over this like long-term, hard, difficult work, they're the ones that have a really, really clear why. They have a really clear commitment and a vision that's big enough to sustain them and to get over all of the constant bumps and challenges that come up, but also that helps them make decisions. That if they sit down with some of these super in the weeds technical partners, they're being asked questions. Well, would you like A, B, or C? And if we don't have a North Star, if we don't have a way to return to our core vision, then it's really, really difficult to make those kinds of decisions. So because of that, Design for Peace, like we're not primarily a technical partner. We're not primarily there to say we've got all the engineers and all of the lawyers and all of the others. We actually rely on a really big network of partners for that, because the truth is, in the Northwest, there is a lot of technical expertise available for churches that want to build housing, that want to put solar panels. There's lots of organizations, there's money. The challenge is in preparing the readiness in the local congregation around the why, that just like we've been talking about, why should we do this? Is this sacred work or is this secular work? Is this connected to our identity as a faith community? And if so, like how do we talk about that? There's a need to build teams that actually, like, all of this work needs to be locally owned by people who are in neighborhoods, who are accountable in local neighborhoods. It can't be brought in from somewhere else. So we're really committed to helping to build teams. And then also it's about building critical mass within inside faith communities and or other kinds of communities. That if we just get on webinars and get really, really smart, but there's only 3 of us from our church or our faith community or organization, it's going to be really hard if we don't know how to turn that into momentum, critical mass, energy across our whole community to say yes to things that are going to take years, or we're going to need to raise money, or we're going to need to do things that are difficult that we haven't done before. So Design for Peace is really committed to that. So I'm sharing a lot, but like that's sort of the core of our work, is about accompanying teams, equipping and supporting teams who are discerning, designing, and experimenting around the vision of peace. The vision of shalom is often language we use, who are rooted in thinking about how they use their space differently as a community. So I'll pause there, and if there's more, I can share introductorily, then I'm happy to, but I know that there's others we want to hear from as well.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I want to pass it over to Reverend Love, because your community has been part of these, not necessarily part of Design for Peace, but you've been doing these conversations and having these conversations, and you have made some adjustments and taken some steps to put these things into practice. And so I'm wondering if you could share more about Englewood Christian Church and talk about the ways in which you are using your physical properties, using this kind of why as
Yeah.
a centering space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stacey. So I think to answer this question well, I actually need to go back just a little bit previous to me being here at Englewood Christian Church. So one of the important things to know and understand about the framework and the lens that I bring to this conversation is that a lot of my passion surrounds ministry innovation, right? Like I'm a big believer in faith communities and the difference that faith communities have the potential to make. However, I think a lot of times that potential gets stymied, and our spirit of creativity and innovation and relevancy can really get suppressed. And a lot of times it's because we've got certain ways we've always done things, or, traditions, or we're afraid of offending certain people. And so for me, one of the things that I'm really, really passionate about is how do we rethink, and how do we rethink space and ministry practices, what that looks like. I like what Joey said a second ago, what is sacred, what is secular. I think that has always kind of been more of a, clearly delineated line in the past, and not so much anymore going into the future. And so when before I came to Englewood, I was a church planter in Southwest Missouri, and we planted a church very much kind of trying to push the bounds of ministry innovation, and how can we rethink space? How can we rethink how we use things, materials that we use, environmental impact, those kind of things. And so I did that work for 5 years. And then when I felt like it was time to make a shift, this opportunity at Englewood was really perfect, because one of the things that I appreciated about the community at Englewood, this church has been in existence for more than 60 years. And so that question of what is our why, I think we also have to recognize that there are seasons and there are chapters in the life of a ministry where maybe our previous why, that was our North Star that guided us for a long time, needs to shift because the needs of our community are shifting. And so I think one of the first places a lot of us as faith leaders and faith communities have to start is understanding how to do that and stay connected to our communities so we know what those needs are as they shift and as they change, so that we stay relevant as faith communities and we stay connected to the needs of our community. And so I came here really because Englewood wanted to go through a period of ministry innovation and how do we rethink what it means to be church in our community. And so we started with kind of a power mapping of like, what are the needs of this city? And we did a bunch of surveys and trying to understand that. And from those answers, began a lot of conversations around creating a culture of innovation inside of that faith community that says it can't just be driven by my cool idea or, a small committee of us that think this one thing would be great, whether that is, solar panels or, xeriscaping our landscaping or some crazy project that we put together. This has to be something that we all really find ownership around. And more importantly than that, it has to change the way that we think of our buildings as I love how Joey said privilege of space. And with that privilege comes how do we steward that space? How are we using that space, not just for our needs and meeting our vision and our mission statement, but how are we using this space for the benefit of our community, making sure that we're doing it in a socially responsible way across the board. And so here at Englewood, that's been a big part of our focus for the last 2 years since I got here. And so we have created a huge plan to turn more than 52% of our building into a community center. And that work will be going on until 2028 when it officially launches. But a lot of that was very much shaped by what are the needs of our community and how do we understand that our why is shifting. And so our how has to shift. And we need to rethink how we use that space accordingly to really maximize our call to ministry and the impact that we can make on our neighbors in need.
That's amazing. I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the ways in which the building usage is changing
Yeah.
and the ways in which you've kind of responded to what you've witnessed and learned from community members.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a Montessori school in our building for 35 years, which was great. We love Montessori and we love what they're doing. And it's kept us afloat in times that were really difficult. However, they are ready to grow and we are growing wonderfully, which is, a great problem for two organizations under the same roof to have. So as we tried to figure out, they're going to be moving out in 2028. What do we need to fill that space with? We have 7 projects that we've identified. So one of them is a free mental health clinic that we will be creating with community partners and being able to service individuals who maybe don't have access to mental health because of lack of insurance or different barriers. We'll also be doing a transitioning young adult drop-in center. And what I mean by this is we've had a lot of community members raise concerns around individuals ages 18 to about 30. So that age frame, right, where we're all trying to learn how to adults and how to get out into the world and, insurance falls off and we're trying to figure out careers and all of these different stressors. There's a lot of really unique mental health challenges in that season. And so we want to create a space specifically for them. So we're looking at group therapy rooms, therapy modalities like music therapy, art therapy, yoga classes, those kind of things. We also will serve as a stand-up shelter in times of emergency for our community, for our unhoused neighbors when it's really cold, when it's really hot. We'll be doing community classes. We're adding a smart classroom that we'll be able to use. And then we've got a huge green space in the back where we're looking at community gardens and some xeriscaping and some different projects like that as well.
And sounds like yeah, I'm guessing, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it sounds like those may have just been the tip of the iceberg in terms of the ideas that were generated as to what could be done in this season. Um, I'm wondering, Joey, for you, I'm gonna share. Let's see if I do like a ad spotlight. So both of you, yes, amazing. So y'all are both up there. Is like are the types of projects that Christie's talking about, are they similar to projects that you're hearing about in the communities that you're working with, or are there other projects that you would add on to as well?
Yeah, no, it's really resonant, and Christy, it's lovely to hear, and congratulations on everything that's emerging and bubbling up where you are, and it just sounds like really encouraging, and I love to hear that story so that others can get inspired. I think it's such a dance, such a delicate dance sometimes between wanting to learn from other places and then not falling into the pitfall of sort of replicating something that worked somewhere else. So I just want to acknowledge that one thing I hear in your story, Christy, is listening and understanding your context really, really clearly. So that I want to resist the urge to say, oh, you're going to build this exact thing. Like, let's take the blueprints and we're going to drop it on the other side of the mountains. But actually to take the lesson that you're learning really listening really carefully and learning what's necessary and what's relevant locally. And I think that is just such an important lesson in this work. But to answer your question, AC, absolutely it resonates. And I think it resonates in terms of vision. The language we use is peace, is the vision of shalom, and that we find that resonates in lots of different communities. And that we can say, at least in the ELCA, like the progressive Lutheran spaces, that, one of the phrases we often use is that the church doesn't have a mission. God's mission has a church, and that the mission of spirit, the mission of the divine presence in the world is very clear. It's a mission of peace, it's a mission of well-being and wholeness, and the church can get on board or not. Like, we can get involved or not, but that's bubbling up everywhere all the time. So there are things that I see in the teams that we work with which totally resonate with that sense of vision, and I think are really similar to what we're hearing. Some of them are short term and are sort of more immediate things that congregations can do, and some of them are really big swings to really reimagine their space. And so a couple of them I'll mention is around food, and I think maybe we'll circle to this idea of resilience in a moment, but I think food access, and particularly sort of food sovereignty and culturally relevant food, is a really important issue that we're hearing in South Sound kind of area. And so one project I would mention is called Dasom, which is the Korean word for love. Dasom Bicultural School, which is led by a Korean leader named Jenny Kim, who is a mission developer within the ELCA. So she's a leader, an emerging leader, and she is in Federal Way, and every Friday gathers with about 100 elders from the Korean community and other Asian immigrant communities as well for food and support for one another. They do computer classes and English classes and helping fill out forms and just offering mutual support. But also they prepare kimchi and other things together and then sell them in a market in a way that provides some income for folks who are on a fixed income in their older years. So it's an example of using a physical space where they grow sesame in the garden and they have a physical kitchen that they have upgraded over the last couple of years to really blend, cultural relevance with really important local leadership, and to provide food and importantly to provide connection and resources across the community. So that is an example that came to mind. The solar thing is really important. There's a great congregation in Olympia called Good Shepherd, and a Lutheran congregation that did some amazing work with an org that I would recommend, which is called Olympia Community Solar. And we have a webinar on our Design for Peace website that sort of connected with them. And they did some really wonderful work to access federal rebate money, which may or may not exist anymore, but which enabled them to cover their roof and solar panels. And that access to that was available through their food ministry, their food bank work. So they were seen as a place that supports the well-being of their wider community. That made that rebate more accessible. And then in 15 years, the church will own that array. And we'll be able to continue being, a provider, a creator of local green energy. There's a few others that I could name. In fact, there's a lot I could name, but I think they're connected to growing food locally, creating energy locally. And perhaps in a moment, I'll share more about how we think about resilience. But I will just mention there are also congregations that we're working with who, as I said, are sort of taking really big long-term pictures of this work. And I see that absolutely as connected to the vision of peace and to the vision of being community, like hubs of resilience. But in some cases, what they're doing is building affordable housing. And I think, as many of us know, there's a big movement across this country to see the huge amount of space and land and open developable space that faith communities hold, and to pursue affordable housing to create stability for families and communities. So we're working with a Methodist church in the north end of Tacoma here, that is over several years has discerned that they're willing to demolish the entire building, their full city block in the Proctor neighborhood, and they're pursuing a build of 140 units of affordable housing and a new flexible worship space for them that they can use and that others can use, that's more right-sized for them as a congregation. And it's multi-year work. It's going to be a few years still, but they're in the phase where they're doing their pre-development work, they're raising money, they're really committed to that journey, and it's really incredible to see. The other one I would mention, and there's a few more we're working with, but is again the church that is a few blocks from my house, Peace Lutheran, which has had a transitional housing ministry for several years, or for about 10 years or so, but has recognized that transitional housing is a challenging ministry model, a challenging housing model that's very intensive in lots of ways, and in some ways it provides really important resilient structures in the short term, but doesn't necessarily solve long-term access to housing needs, and so is in the process of a pre-development feasibility study to remove two of the 100-year-old single-family homes and build more dense, affordable apartment housing here in the Hilltop, and again, which is really clearly committed to resisting gentrification and creating opportunities for return or stability of Black families here in the Hilltop. So their mission, their clarity has enabled them so far to sort of power through some really challenging long-term work already and to keep pursuing that vision. So I think it runs the gamut. It's we're going to put in some new beds to our garden, and we're going to grow food, all the way to we're going to take the next 5-10 years to build housing and make sure our neighbors are housed. And I think it all is aligned with the vision of peace and with this idea of being places that nurture resilience in our communities.
Yeah, I really love that kind of spectrum that you're naming, and I hope that those who are participating today, who may watch later, will really resonate with that part of the conversation that we're having is not a one size fits all. Is that really understanding your context, your community, what the needs are, both within the congregation, within the sacred community itself, but also the surrounding neighbors and neighborhood, which in my own kind of seminary training was that is your congregation, that not just the people who worship inside the building, but those who are all the way around. And I think, Joe, you mentioned for Peace Lutheran, it's a 10 by 10 block by 10 block kind of pattern. So I'm hoping you're hearing that there's not one size fit all, which is kind of daunting, but it also leaves room for creativity and innovation and excitement, and actually doing things that benefit the world and benefit in my faith tradition we would call like God's beloved community, God's beloved creation. So I'm wondering if Christie, either you or Joey, or maybe you both, would speak to, I've heard you both kind of talk a little bit about environment and solar or energy, but the ways in which you see like climate resiliency or clean energy or energy projects like actually being part of this work. I mean, that was one of the kind of questions we led with. What does solar panels have to do with food ministry or low-income housing? Like, what are your senses about how the climate resiliency connects into building projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I would say to answer that, and I'm going to kind of bridge us, if that's okay, because I want to build off of something that Joey said and then answer your question all in one, AC. I think it's also really important. This work can be really intimidating for congregations. And so I also want to add another thing. You talked about innovation and, excitement and those kind of things, but it's also a really exciting opportunity for collaboration. And notoriously, faith communities are not always the greatest at coming together around a project, right? It's kind of like, oh, this is what we're working on. This is what we're working on. But I also think that this work is an amazing opportunity for faith communities and interfaith communities to come together and work together. And some of that work may require us to look at things like building sharing. We converted our church building in Missouri into a transitional housing unit, and we did that because we were able to start space sharing with another congregation creatively so that we could permanently dedicate this. And we now do the same thing here in Englewood. We have a UU church that meets in our building at the same time. What that does is it also allows like-minded and like-valued congregations to come together and kind of talk about how do we prioritize some of these projects that are more of the hardware pieces. Like, how could we share our resources to come together around, reducing our environmental footprint, putting together a recycling program. And then it's not just one community in that building. It's two that are actually sharing the cost of the building. You're reducing kind of and consolidating that faith footprint, but you're looking at ways to come together and share that space as well. And so, for us right now, we're looking at what is the solar power piece of this look like. And, Joey kind of alluded earlier, there's been really great grants. Some of those are not as readily available currently. I have faith that those will come back and we'll be able to tap into those again in the future. But some of it is also small things like we've gone completely away from one-time use dishes. Like when we do a potluck, we don't use paper plates or things like that anymore. We wash dishes every single time that we get together. And that's just something that's been really important to us to be able to kind of use those things as examples. So thinking of things as stair steps, I think are also important, that you may not be able to get to the really big stuff that usually has a big price tag with it right out of the gate, but there's lots of little things that you can do in doing that. Like we have a ton of green space. And so part of what we're trying to do is we've taken on 3 different xeriscape projects where we can just reduce our need for irrigation. We live in a desert. And how do we be more mindful of that and create things that are more native and honoring and using our resources well? And we do that in partnership with the UU church that's also in our building. So we're sharing the responsibilities of weeding and planting and all of those kind of things together.
I love that, Christie. Everything you're sharing, I'm nodding furiously and really encouraged to hear what you're saying. I think one of the things to hopefully not oversimplify this, but AC, what comes to mind for me or comes to my heart when you ask this question is, the work of climate resilience, which, just to be clear, I think means supporting congregations and communities in accessing everything they need for wholeness for their human life, right? That to build resilience is to be a faith community. It's not something additional or something extra or something completely separate. And I think I alluded to this earlier in the sort of the sacred and the secular. And, often we have had sort of binaries in that way. And the fellowship hall is a different kind of space than the sanctuary. And they are. But I, for one, really feel that there's an important movement shifting in all of us where we recognize that all is sacred and that our identity is rooted in our human lives, in our communities really widely, and not just in the one special place, that everything is really sacred. I'm actually really inspired by, I have a friend who's a photographer, but from back in Scotland, and he did a photo essay. And there's a book that's available I would recommend to everyone if they want to be inspired for this. And it's called The Church Forests of Ethiopia. And it's an incredible book because it's really about deforestation in Ethiopia. And there's lots of these drone shots. But what's incredible is that the churches around these old, I think, Coptic congregations in Ethiopia are the only places where there are still old growth forests, the ancient forests of Ethiopia. And they have a wall around them, and they are these paradises. They're these oases of biodiversity and of original, old growth forest in the midst of deforestation. And I think there's something metaphorically extremely striking about that, but also literally, like, these are places of resilience. These are places where the seed bank is still there of the ancient forests of Ethiopia. But it's not separate from their identity as a church. It's not a separate project some committee took on. That's an identity. We are the stewards of this earth. We are the stewards of the ancient forest. And it's reflected in the way that they're holding on to biodiversity in that place in the midst of an industry, capitalist system that has deforested all of the space around them. So I hold on to that image really to say there's not a separation between being a faith community and taking on the work of climate resilience. So I'll share that. I think just briefly, I'll allude. I got into this work in part as a sort of academic researcher as well around resilience, and that I think globally, but also here in North America, there is a real growing interest in the idea of resilience, and the research really clearly shows that faith communities have a huge amount of potential to provide and create resilience in communities. And I think that the data shows that across the world, that if you're in the aftermath of a disaster, of a earthquake, a natural disaster, or even in violent situations, that faith communities often are trusted places where there's high relational trust, where people know who to ask and know how to get access to resources and support each other in mutuality. And I think that's the invitation for us here in the States, as to how do we live into that really deep culture and that tradition of faith communities being hubs of resilience, being spaces where you're known. And the language we use is that, yes, there's a physical and a hardware sort of dimension. That means solar panels, that means having food, that means having water, or like smoke filters and things. But there is no point in us doing all of the work to build those things if our buildings are not full, if they're not placed. And how do we fill our buildings? We do it by building trust, that by having relationships, by being known as a space where you can get these resources. And so, yes, the hardware is one important part of the triangle, but the relational resilience is another really, really critical part. And then the third is a spiritual and emotional resilience, that often when we use the word resilience, we mean, we can recover after a shock, right? And for us as people of faith, that might mean scripture, that might mean meditation, that might mean poetry or connection with others. But that we have really deep wells of resource as people of faith. But I think it's when those three come together that we're actually really living into a really compelling vision of what it means to be a faith community today. We have hardware for resilience that our world needs. We're building on that. We have relational resilience that we're building in our networks and our communities, just like I'm hearing Christie say. And we have emotional and spiritual resilient tools that we're building. And if we can marry those all together and really live into that, I think that's what it means to be the faith communities that we need in our communities.
Thank you both for the it feels like a disservice to try to wrap up both of what you both have said in just a short synopsis, and yet I really want to encourage. I'm gonna shift our spotlight for a second. I want to encourage those of you all who um, have experienced something today, maybe heard something or saw something, if the slides actually came up and you actually saw the slides that were on there, that if some of these conversations are interesting to you, know that you have community partners here who are wanting to support you in this work of exploring with your sacred community about what 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 are the ways that you can move towards living out your community's mission and your vision, and supporting the context that you are at. So Design for Peace would welcome partnerships. I hear Joey saying would welcome partnerships. And I know, Reverend Love, you are doing your own work as a individual pastor and community, but I'm sure would be open to questions, reflections, if people have them. I do want to point to as we move toward kind of wrapping up, point to this last piece, which is the hardware piece. So this webinar series is part one of two. We will be having a second webinar, July. Nope, just kidding. Not that J month. The other J month, which is June, June 17th. It will be a Wednesday midday, and registration page hasn't gone up yet, but it will be. And this is for people who are in communities who are interested in the hardware piece, especially as it relates to tax incentives from our federal tax incentives. And you're right, a lot of those are going away, but there's still some that are available. Solar is still available in terms of tax incentives. Those are back end payments, but this next upcoming webinar will give you an opportunity to hear from a group called Lawyers for Good Government, who will be able to answer questions and tell you more about the tax incentives that that faith communities and spiritual communities are eligible to receive as part of the Inflation Reduction Act and part of resources that, again, are coming from our federal government. There are also a lot of other additional supports that are kind of front-end funding, grants. Those, I would also echo what Joey said, which is Olympia Community Solar is an amazing resource that can help you if you're ready for that kind of hardware project. But come back next in a couple of weeks and we'll have that hardware conversation. But remember, at the center of it is knowing your why. Like, what is your community trying to do, and how can you do it effectively? And centering that will help you then to determine and understand exactly what tools you need. And this, I want to kind of give any kind of last words I'm going to stop the spotlight. Any last words to Joey or Christie as we conclude our time together?
Just super grateful. Thanks for the invitation. And yeah, I'll echo the invitation. If folks want to chat, please go to our website. It's wedesignforpeace.com or .org rather. And I'm really looking forward to ways that we can collaborate with FAN and with faith communities all over, because I think this work really matters. So thanks for the invitation to conversation. And Reverend Christie, it's great to be on with you, and I'm really encouraged by your work. Thank you too.
Yeah, you as well, Joey and AC. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for pulling this together. I'm grateful for fans' advocacy and just champion of this work and pulling people together as conversation partners. I think it's critical, it's huge, and I think just safe spaces to brainstorm ideas and share resources and what has worked, but also learning how to make sure that they're contextualized to your community is a big important piece of that. So I'm excited to see those conversations continue.
I will leave you with all of this then. This is part of FAN has a whole collection of resources on how advocacy is a spiritual practice. And one of the quotes comes from our Unitarian Universalist siblings, and it says this: "What is love calling you to do? The world needs us to show up for justice with spiritual grounding, generosity, humility, courage, and concrete skills. It is a spiritual practice to choose love over fear, to be brave, to show up when we're called, and to occupy space with loving resistance rather than fearful retreat." So in my tradition, we'd say, beloved ones, may you go forth from this space, figuring and experiencing presence of the spirit of love that is around, and we together build these movements of resilience and hope, of creativity and love and justice for all, so that we may move into a season where we don't just survive, but we thrive. Blessings, y'all. Hope the rest of your afternoon is what you need it to be.